imagine back when you were in school or university and your lecturer comes to you and says that you have one major assignment worth 100%. If you fail everything. And that assignment is going to be due on the 10th of November. Now, as you look around the class, you realize that all of you have some serious decisions to make, really about how you spend your year. Do you invest yourself in the student life, the parties, the games, the cafes, or do you start to really focus in on your study? Now, amongst all your students in your class, you know that there's always going to be at least one or two who don't have a social life and are just purely focused on their study. They'll be the ones who go straight to the library and start pulling out books. You know that the majority of the students are going to try and weigh up their priorities. They'll live most of the year having fun. Maybe around September, they might start to get serious, start to make a few sacrifices in their social life, and then really focus in on their assignment. But you also know that there'll be some, maybe a handful, who are going to leave it till the last moment. They'll trade off potentially their whole future for the sake of having as much fun as they can during their student years. And so a week before the due date, they'll start cramming. They'll stay up all night, fueled by caffeine, and study as frantically as they can, hoping that they can just get enough to pass. But what if your lecturer came to you and said, actually, the 10th of November is the average due date? You see, every student will get a phone call sometime during the year, and that phone call will tell them that their assignment is now due. The majority of students will get a phone call around about the 10th of November. Some will get a call later, maybe December. But some are going to receive that call a whole lot earlier in the year, August, March, maybe next week. And as soon as you receive that phone call, you have to hand in your assignment, whatever you've done. That would change your priorities significantly. Straight away, you'd realize that as much fun as university is, you've got to start thinking seriously because you have no idea when your course is going to be ending. To use that analogy, I think kind of explains a bit of what Jesus is trying to get at in this gospel. You see, Jesus is very clear in these scriptures. He says, be on your guard, stay awake, because you never know when the time will come. We live often in this false sense of security that the average life expectancy is somewhere between 75 and 80. And so we can have fun, live for ourselves, and eventually start to think about the big things of life. But what Jesus is trying to point out here is that that's just the average life expectancy. Some are going to live a whole lot longer. Some people are going to get that call very soon. And this is the thing we sort of live in denial of. You know, we know that we hear stories regularly of people who have tragic accidents, people who suddenly fall ill, die unexpectedly before they've really had a chance to focus in on what's important. And time and again, we hear these stories where people who suddenly come down with cancer or suddenly realize that life is short, and they start to tell everybody else that nothing else really matters. The things that we distract ourselves with, the things that we think are fun, once you start to realize the shortness of life, you realize that actually they're pretty empty. The important things are the things of relationship, the things of faith, the things of character, of who we are before God. This wake-up call always comes at the beginning of Advent. The scriptures always begin this preparing for the coming of Christ by reminding us of what life is about, or really what the shortness of life is, so that we can discover the true meaning. In the readings this weekend, the first reading really starts to put things in perspective. This is a reading really worth sitting with and meditating over, because it talks very beautifully about relationship, really, with God. You know, the reading begins with the author basically calling for God to return, for God to come down again to the earth. You know, ever since we have sort of lived in exile, since our big stuff up in the Garden of Eden, and it's like we've been blinded to the presence of God. God is always here. God is always surrounding us, but we can't see God. We only really see ourselves and our own emptiness and our own hunger. And so here is the author saying, God, return for the sake of your servants. Oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, touch the mountains that they would smoke. Really calling out again that the glory of God would be made manifest to us. But in the same breath, the author is then aware of, I suppose, his own inadequacy. You know, that in the light of God's glory and God's transcendence, we start to realize our own ugliness. We start to realize that we've lived our lives without God. We've lived our lives seeking so many other things, and we've missed the point. We've thought that these little trivial things and small games that we play were the main deal. But it's when we start to gaze upon the glory of God, we realize that they're all kind of empty. This is where it puts life in perspective. We're now preparing for the coming of Christ. The celebration of Christmas, which sadly is something we've become so desensitized to. You know, it's become a celebration of baby Jesus and a whole bunch of nice Christmas carols and children's nativity plays. And we've kind of domesticated this grand mystery of the transcendent God who comes into our midst. The God who almost calls us to account for the life and the breath that we have. But at the same time, the God who reminds us of why we actually exist. We exist to be in relationship with our Creator, not with creation. You know, so often we turn creation into our love affair, trying to seek the beautiful things of earth, and we forget the one who created it. This Sunday, as we begin Advent, and as we meditate on these readings, it really is a call back to what life is about. To reflect very seriously on the due date of your life. You know, do you have any idea when God is going to call and call for an account of the life you've lived? But in light of that stark reality, to start to change your priorities, start to see things a little bit differently, and realize what life is actually about.